What's up? Brandon Lilly here. Been getting a question a lot lately, more and more, about integrating bands and chains into your training, specifically the cube method. And one of the things that I constantly tell people, when I wrote the cube method, one of the things that I talked about was getting back to the basics and getting back to just the barbell, dumbbells, and kettlebells, and simplifying your training. And the reason I said that is because a lot of people that I was working with, a lot of people that I was reading their logs and questions that I would see online, is they misunderstood how to implement the bands and chains. So one of the things that I really focus on for raw lifters, because that tends to be where I work with more people. I do have some geared lifters, but with raw lifters, I tell them to look at the context of the material that they're trying to apply to their training. So let's say that you are looking at the West Side method and you want to use bands and chains, or you're looking at the cube method and you want to apply bands and chains. Lilly perfected bands and chains for gear. They started out with more single ply type gear, and as the gear progressed, the band variances or the band percentages changed, and as the gear changed, the percentages changed, the waves changed, and everything evolved as the gear progressed. So one of the things that they talk about is the circumax phase, or using accommodating resistance in around the 40% range. So most guys that I know that can squat 1,000 pounds in gear, and I'm going to use just a rough estimate based on where my strength levels were and so forth, but I would say they have a 650 to 750 pound raw squat, give or take, maybe more, maybe less, but I would say that they're getting probably close to 300 pounds from their briefs and from their suit combination plus knee reps. So you have to take into account the amount of band tension that they're using at 40%. So let's cut that in half and say 20% for your maximum as a raw lifter. So to create a 3-week wave, I think 5% is a little bit too light, but I think 10% is a great starting point. So let's look at a 10%, 15%, and 20% wave for a 500-pound squatter. Let's say on your week 1 or your heaviest week of the cube, I'm just going to use the cube because that's what I'm most familiar with my trainees. On your heavy day, week 1, you would use 10% of your band resistance over your squat. So let's say you're using 450, you're going to use 10% plus that, so you're going to be at about 495, 500 range at the top, which is going to put you somewhere in the range of 430 or so down in the bottom, because the bands drop off. The next week you'd use 15%, which is going to be another 25 pounds or so. You're talking about being around 525 at the top, and then you're going to go to the next week, which is going to be around 20%, which is going to put you somewhere in the neighborhood of 540, 550 as far as the waves. And to use them on your repetition day, stick around the 10% range. I think they're really, really good at building explosiveness and teaching the body to fire out of the hole. But one of the common mistakes, and one of the reasons that I tell so many beginners to shy away from the bands, is I wasn't even a beginner, but I was making this mistake. When I was doing my deadlifts with the bands, or I was doing my squats with the bands, I was allowing the band to work as a Smith machine. It was keeping my squat form in line, it was keeping my deadlift in line, and when I would go to squat without the bands, lo and behold, instead of sitting back like I was with the bands and giving me that assistance, I was shooting way over my ankles. My knees were terribly forward, and I was having a lot of problems coming out of the hole because I was in such an extended position. In the deadlift, I could pull really well against the bands, I could pull really fast, take them away, and the bar would drift 2 to 3 inches away from my body. It was because I wasn't learning the proper technique without the bands to apply the bands. So that's why I really think the majority of your work should be done without bands, especially like on your explosive day or your repetition day, and then add them maybe in at the end for some burnout type work, maybe on a drop down set for your repetition day or something like that. But they can be a great overload on a heavy day. I do recommend that most people start with chains, even though they're a little bit more expensive, a little bit harder to find. The chains don't react as violently on the reversal as the bands do. They're going to fall at the weight of gravity. They're going to pull you up at the weight of gravity, or pull down at the weight of gravity, whereas bands pull down at about twice the rate of gravity. So start with your chains, get used to the feel of that, and then implement your bands. I think, like I said, I think they're a great tool when applied properly. But the problem is that too many raw guys look at the West Side method, which is a great method, but they look at the method and they'll say, okay, Louis says to use 45% or 50% or whatever percentage that they're looking at, and they try to apply it to themselves. Lo and behold, they forget that they're using gear. You know, even if it's just a pair of briefs to assist that lift and to assist the recovery. You don't realize how much more recovery you're going to get just from having those briefs on. You're not going to be having to push as hard out of the hole. Now, from about the midpoint up, yeah, it's going to be a lot more legs and back. But at the bottom, you're getting that nice pop from the briefs or from the suit bottoms or whatever you're using. The other thing is, on speed days for bench, I get this question a lot. Guys want to use something along the lines of bands, or, you know, how do you implement the slingshot? Well, same principle. I think the main thing on speed day is that maybe, I'm not arguing with it because a lot of guys get fantastic results with it, but I think that a lot of times the percentage is shifted too lightly with weight, and they went too heavy with the bands again on speed day. So I would prefer, if Louis proposes to use, say, 45% of bar weight, 25% of band weight, or something along those lines on speed day, I might be more inclined to use 55% bar weight and 15% band weight, or 60% bar weight and 10% band weight, for a total of 70% at the top, just because as a raw lifter, I need the ability to push off the bottom in the hole. Most guys really either miss at the bottom right off their chest, or at the top right near the lockout. So I feel the best way to maximize that is to lower the band weight a little bit and up the bar weight. That way you're actually getting that strong push off your chest, and then actually getting more lockout because of the 10 to 15% band wave. So just be mindful of that. Look at what you're doing. Don't go necessarily by what I say or what Louis says or what anybody says to the T, because I can guarantee you in my cube training it's much different than what you see in the book, because every single cycle, every single workout, I'm trying to adapt it better to where I am at that point in time. And that's the same truth that was held when I was at Westside. If Louis saw something that needed to be modified, or if he changed something for a group of guys, say 3 or 4 guys were doing something different and it worked, he was going to implement it to the next group to see if it worked for them as well. So what you see in the books or what you see in the templates, they're true as, maybe as a cut and paste or for a one-size-fits-all. But for the true champions or the guys that are at the top, they're always modifying to themselves. So don't be one of those people that overdoes it and tests everything and tries everything for a week and then you skip to something else. But give yourself the freedom to look at a template and modify it to what you think works for you. If you don't like good mornings, that's one thing. But if good mornings, actually, if you've done them properly and you've done them over and over again and they don't benefit you, why would you continue to do good mornings? Maybe stiff leg deadlifts would benefit you better. But if you just don't like them, it may be because you're weak at them and your ego won't let you do it. So the best advice I can give anybody, whether it's band, chain, box, gear, raw, whatever it is, don't knock it. Just try to understand it a little bit better and implement it how it can best benefit you. I think there's time where raw lifters can benefit from gear or like a slingshot or loose briefs to get a little bit of an overload, or using the bands. And I think there's a time that gear lifters need to take the gear off and get stronger raw. So the more you look at strength training, the more universal you see that we all are, and the more connected that we all are. Just don't get trapped up in the methodology of this versus that and this versus that. Just do what you need to do to get strong, and you'll be a lot better for it. Thanks a lot.